In my preview of USC versus Nebraska, I talked about how both of these teams could not win a close game to save their life, and how one of them was going to have to clutch up and win, because in a game featuring two teams, in which the rules state there cannot be any ties, there has to be a winner and a loser. And USC was the winner, and Nebraska was the loser. And for the loser of the game, it was going to hurt and hit hard no matter what, and there was going to be somewhat of a sigh of relief on the winning side. And I think that is what happened here. In a game where USC overcame the Nebraska Cornhuskers to win 28-20. USC looked like the better team for almost the entirety of the game, even on the pick six play where C.R. Wright intercepted Jayden Maiava, took it 45 yards back to the house, and he had a huge game. C.R. Wright did. Good for him. He deserves kudos. I think he was probably Nebraska's best player in the game. But even during that play, even following the play, USC was doing a better job of moving up and down the field than Nebraska was. And they were doing a better job on defense as well. Nebraska just happened to take the interception that they had back to the house and score 6, while the 2 times that USC intercepted Dylan Raiola, they didn't go for any gain. They just picked the ball off there and then fell down and the play was over. So this is another game where, look, for Matt Rule in Nebraska, it's painful. I don't know how they're going to respond. The final 2 games don't look optimistic, but Nebraska can win both of them. It's just a question of whether they will. And as for USC, it's a similar story. But I want to break this game down, give you some takeaways, and overall my reaction and analysis of what was a close game, an entertaining game, and a massive opportunity for both of these schools. And because they're 5-5 right now, they have 2 massive opportunities ahead of them to get to bowl eligibility and maybe even finish the year with a winning record and end the season on a very high note. Before we get into my takeaways, though, and my reaction, I want you to do something for the channel and score a touchdown for it. If you can do these 7 things, with the 7th being optional, I'd very much appreciate it, and they won't take that much time. If you could subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell, I'd appreciate that a lot. And then if you can also like the video to boost our presence in the algorithm, comment your reaction and analysis of this game down below, share the video around, join our Discord server. It's free. You just click the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment where it says Discord server link, and you'll be in. And the extra point of these 7 points, you've already gotten into the end zone. You've already scored the touchdown. It's the responsibility of the kicker to kick that extra point. If you want to make that, well, that's supporting the channel monetarily, and either super chatting down in the comment section below, or signing up as a paid member on the Patreon page, or purchasing merchandise from our merchandise store. And you can access the merchandise store and Patreon page via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. But again, like the video to get us in the algorithm, and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when new videos drop, and so that you can be on our journey when we'll hit 30,000 subscribers. That's our next goal, and we'll be doing a giveaway to celebrate us hitting 20,000 subscribers at the end of the regular season, which is approaching us rather quickly. And speaking of that, let's talk about this game and go over the basic statistics, gloss over them, and then we'll, well, get into the takeaways for USC and Nebraska specifically. So in this matchup, which was very close, it was very competitive, really what it came down to was the fact that USC had better players and better coaches. And it's not like they were vastly superior at, let's say, defensive end compared to Nebraska at defensive end, or their matchup between defensive tackle and interior offensive line wasn't vastly superior compared to Nebraska's matchup on interior offensive line versus defensive tackle, or quarterback and wide receiver versus defensive back, for example. It's not like USC had massive matchup advantages here watching this game, because both of these teams were able to throw some punches one way and they were able to counterpunch. Nebraska had the early 7-0 lead. Then USC tied at 7-7 with a very nice drive. Then they had an 8-play, 86-yard drive early in the second quarter to take the lead, 14-7. That's a lead change right there. And then Nebraska tied it up 14-14 with a beautiful Emmett Johnson 29-yard pass from Dylan Raiola. It was a nice play by Emmett Johnson, out-angled his man, and got to the end zone. Out of the gate, in the third quarter, Nebraska drives down and kicks a field goal to make it 17-14. It's another lead change. USC makes another lead change with a touchdown. Nebraska kicks a field goal to make it a 1-point game. And then under 3 minutes to go, USC scores a touchdown that ended up winning the football game. That's really how the game went. And I mentioned that. I don't typically go through that stuff, like briefly mentioning the drives, because sometimes it's not consequential, especially in a game that isn't close. But this was very close, very competitive. There were a lot of lead changes, and at the end of the day, it was just USC's ability to score more points per play, to get touchdowns instead of field goals, that helped them pull ahead. They averaged 6.5 yards per play to Nebraska's 4.8. Nebraska's been averaging 4.8 yards per play throughout the season. On a points per play margin basis, USC scored 0.104 more points per one of their plays compared to one of Nebraska's plays. Nebraska had a negative 0.104 points per play margin. You look at third and fourth down conversions, Nebraska was 6 of 14 on the day in third and fourth down conversions and attempts added. USC was 7 of 14. USC was more highly penalized, 5 penalties for 70 yards compared to Nebraska's 5 penalties for 40 yards. And both teams had 2 turnovers. Maiava had a pick and a fumble, and Dylan Raiola had 2 fumbles. Again, very close game. Penalties, similar. Turnovers, similar. Both teams were 1 of 1 on fourth down. Nebraska was 5 of 13 on third down. USC was 6 of 13. At the end of the day, it was USC scoring touchdowns and Nebraska kicking field goals that really turned this game into the result that it was, the 28-20 USC victory. And I want to talk about Nebraska here first, because we save the best for last. We save the winning team typically to talk about them last, and we talk about the bad and the ugly first. And that was Nebraska, because this offense had an opportunity against a USC defense that, look, is very well coached, extremely well schemed, but they're going through injuries. They've redshirted some of their better players to save eligibility for next year. Looking at you, Eric Gentry, hopefully he'll have a massive 2025 season. And yeah, they get thinner and thinner and thinner every week, USC's defense does. And they had an opportunity because, like I said, USC's well coached on defense, and they're competitive, and they do a good job of scheming up their defense to match up well against opposing offenses. It's why they limited Penn State's rushing attack, and Penn State had to beat them through the air to win that football game. And we've seen countless examples of other great schematics against LSU, for example, where they did a nice job in that matchup of making Garrett Nussmeier work 100% to lose by a touchdown. And against Michigan, made amazing second-half adjustments to completely strangle Michigan's rushing attack until that final drive. And I could go on and on and on. But they don't have the players yet. And Nebraska has some nice players on offense, Dylan Raiola included, their running backs, Thomas Fidone at tight end, and some of their talented receivers. But it wasn't enough. Nebraska totaled 310 yards, 20 points, 7 of which, 7, was off of a pick six. So really only 13 offensive points, or maybe 14 if you really want to nitpick it and factor in the extra point from the pick six to the offense. But at that point, a little bit of a tangent here, you might as well take out special teams points as a whole and not include field goals, not include extra points. Nebraska only scored 1 offensive touchdown that was outside of the red zone. Among Nebraska's red zone trips, they had an interception in the end zone, which, yes, that was defensive holding, but you're not going to get every call thrown your way. And just don't be in a position. Don't be in a position, especially against a team like USC, who can't win a close game to save their life. Don't be in a position to let that team have a touchdown and 2-point conversion edge on you. Just don't do that. I do not want to hear complaining about the refs. Although, yes, that should have been defensive pass interference or at minimum defensive holding. But I digress. Do not be in that position. In the red zone, field goal, interception, and I forget if there was a third red zone trip or not. Let me quickly check everything here. 29-yard field goal, 2 field goals and an empty drive, which the pick six, not the pick six, but the interception as time expired. The offense is irreparable. Like Dana Holgorsen, he did some things that I thought were good. I thought Nebraska balanced running and passing rather well, and they definitely schemed out things better. I thought that there were more open receivers. They obviously used the running backs in the passing game, and it was better than a game plan that Marcus Satterfield puts together, typically. However, 5 yards per attempt, a touchdown, 2 picks, 119 rushing yards, and then 4.8 yards per carry. That was the highlight, honestly. You could really see Nebraska's maturity in the ground game, and I think experience, and also, more importantly, the schematics coming through in their rushing attack. But ultimately, it's an irreparable offense. It is. You're not fixing that this season. It will take preseason loads of work, using the portal, recruiting, developing, making sure that you have the right coaches and the right coordinator in there. And then on the other side of the ball, Nebraska's issues too. I mean, this defense, I thought entering this year was going to be a top 10 unit. It's not a top 10 unit, guys. It's probably not even top 20, if we're really being honest about it. They allowed 444 total yards, 28 offensive points, 4 offensive touchdowns, 259 passing yards. Maiava averaged 7.4 yards per attempt. He had 185 rushing yards. Lincoln Riley's USC team did. His offense did. And they averaged 6 yards per carry on the ground. It was just, honestly, watching Woody Marks constantly tear through that offensive line was, or not tear through the offensive line, but tear through the defensive line it was just like, come on. With Ty Robinson, with Nash Hutmacher, with Bayer, with the linebackers that they have, with John Bullock, for example, Javin Wright, Jamari Butler. It was disappointing. This has been another game where, Indiana, UCLA, and then USC, it's a pattern. It's a pattern that if you can commit to the run and you have good enough offensive linemen, you can run on this team. Ohio State was the only team over the past few games that has found itself incapable of running on Nebraska. And I think that's more of an Ohio State issue, as I've documented several times, rather than a Nebraska positive. I don't think Nebraska right now is a reliable rushing defense. And I don't think they're a reliable passing defense either. They had that 1 pick six. They had a few other plays that could have been intercepted. Maiava did not have this perfect game by any means. But overall, they didn't finish. That near interception in the end zone, where it was caught by, was it Kyron Hudson, I believe? You got to make that pick. You have to. You have to finish. And then Woody Marks constantly getting through. He had nearly 200 all-purpose yards on several touches. He averaged 7.7 yards per carry with a long of 34. He was consistently gaining yards on the ground, gashing that defense. And I think that Nebraska has to look at potentially a scheme change here, whether that's moving away from the 3-3-5 to the 4-2-5 or the 4-3, or getting better players. But I don't know if it is about the players, because Hutmacher and Robinson are good and were looked at as NFL defensive tackles entering this season. Defensive end and linebacker may need some additional support. The secondary might, but the secondary also has a player like Tommy Hill who's highly rated. C.R. Wright has done well this season. And it's not like their safeties are bad. They're just not elite. So I don't know exactly what to think. I think there are issues on both sides of the football. That is what I believe. I'm not completely confident what is wrong, and that's because I'm an outside observer. I'm not a coach. I'm not in the building. I'm not there from however early they get there, like let's say 5 a.m. to midnight some days. I know that there are guys always in the office doing their best, and they get paid millions of dollars, and this is their craft and their obsession. Mine's talking about the game, not being involved on the sidelines. But this team in Nebraska has issues, and I think it really does relate to the coaching staff more than the players. Because Nebraska, for years in the Big Ten West, was the most talented team or the second most talented team by recruiting rankings. And on this channel, I have said time and time again, not that recruiting rankings are a farce, but they don't matter as much as people say. They just don't. Look at Ole Miss. They do not have a blue chip ratio of over 50%. Less than half of their roster is made up of 3-star or worse players. And yet here they are. They're better than Miami. They're better than Florida. They're better than Florida State. They might be better than Alabama. I mean, Ole Miss could be the best team in the country. Michigan last year, not even 60% of their roster was made up of 4- and 5-star players. And for the previous 3 seasons, not including this one, they've been better than Ohio State. Or at least they've beaten them when they faced up against each other. And I could go on and on and on. Recruiting matters, but it's not the whole picture. Nebraska right now is recruiting well. I mean, they've been flipping guys from Alabama. They're in contention with schools like Texas for prospects. They're recruiting well. Their problem is coaching right now. The decisions that pass through Matt Rule's headset are mind-boggling. They're puzzling. The one play where it looks like they're going to go for it on 4th and 3, they take some time, and then there's the delay of game. It's just the total indecisiveness. Or I don't know why you would. I don't know why you'd have Raiola go deep with these receivers at this point. And Nebraska tried that at multiple points throughout the game. These receivers have some upside to them, but they are far from a complete wide receiver room. It's better to use the tight ends and even use a player like Emmett Johnson or Ramir Johnson out of the backfield. As my friend Connor Hayden at Corncrase says, Raiola's a distributor. He right now is not this. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not, not even Jared Goff, or he's not anywhere close to an NFL quarterback right now. He needs to be developed. Who he is right now is a system QB. And his system isn't all that good, and I don't think they're utilizing him properly. And also the decision to, let Dylan Raiola do what he's doing right now, when maybe Heinrich Harburg would do something and be more of a threat against some of these defenses, because you add in that quarterback run element. I'm throwing things out here, but that's where we're at right now with Nebraska and the coaching staff. There's a big mess right now in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I still think that next year Nebraska will be better. I think this team is better than last year's team, but man, oh man, there are questions that need to be answered, and fast, and they gotta go bowling. Nebraska has to go bowling. If they don't go bowling this year, the season's an absolute failure, and that falls on the coaching staff and Matt Rule. Let's talk about USC and then get out of here. For USC, this was a much-needed victory, because if they were to suffer a loss here, fall to 4-6, they'd have to beat both UCLA on the road and Notre Dame at home. Notre Dame right now is ranked top 5 in FPI. Pardon me. I think they're objectively a top 10 team. And because they beat Nebraska, USC only has to do one of 2 things. They have to beat UCLA, and they can afford a loss to Notre Dame. They could lose to UCLA and upset Notre Dame, or they could win out. They could also lose out, but there's a variety of paths to go bowling. And this is a team that has enough talent to not just beat UCLA, but beat Notre Dame, and they have enough of a competent coaching staff and a good enough game manager in Lincoln Riley to do that as well. They can easily go bowling. They needed this win badly. To lose to Nebraska, to continue losing 1-score games, and I think that would have, I don't know if that would have sealed Lincoln Riley's fate, but I feel like it would have, because I do not have a lot of confidence that this team is going to upset Notre Dame. I think they could. I think it's more likely than some people believe, but they needed this win. They absolutely needed it, and good on Lincoln Riley for coming out of the bye and preparing this team well, holding Nebraska to less than 2 touchdowns of offensive points, scoring 4 touchdowns on a Nebraska defense that, again, we talked about. It's not a top 10 unit. It is not the most efficient defense in the country, but USC scored more points against Nebraska than UCLA did, than Ohio State did. The only team that scored more points in regulation against Nebraska this season was Indiana. And Indiana has one of the most productive offenses in the country. I mean, they're third, I believe, in efficiency per ESPN offensively, and they're number one, by the way, in points per play offensively. I mean, just really, really, really good team. I think they're the most fundamentally sound team in the country. That's the only team who scored more points in regulation offensively against the Cornhuskers. That's it compared to USC. They scored more than Ohio State, than UCLA. UCLA, by the way, had a pick six. More than Rutgers, more than Purdue, more than Illinois in regulation, more than Colorado, Northern Iowa, more than UTEP. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than the offense came and they did what they had to do outside of those two turnovers, and one of which was a pick six. The other one, the defense, they bowed up under D'Anton Lynn, who I think is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, and they held them to a field goal. They played a very good game, the Trojans did, and this was a much-needed win. Jayden Maiava, I think it's interesting and required to point out that I think he's now the face of the program. Miller Moss's time at USC is obviously done. He's going to enter the portal as soon as he can, go somewhere else. Maiava represents a more typical Lincoln Riley quarterback where he can run. I mean, he had 20 rushing yards, long of 13, and he did get sacked once, so he had more than 20 rushing yards if you factor out that sack. Averaged 4 yards per carry, and he had 259 passing yards, averaged 7.4 yards per attempt, had 3 passing touchdowns. He had some ugly throws, some ugly moments in general, bad turnovers, but he also had some very good moments where it's clearly his arm strength. It's clear that he has agility, and he's, I think, a good quarterback. And I think the more in-game experience you give him, the better he'll get. And with where USC season is at this point, you're going to get everything out of him that you can, because USC is going to have to let him loose, especially if they want to beat Notre Dame. They're going to have to let him be as explosive and aggressive as possible within reason, because they're going to need to be exceptional at something and surprise people in order to pull off an upset like that. And he had a 79.4 quarterback efficiency rating, it's great. It's not a perfect game, but he did a good job overall. And I think that he's the future of the program. He's the face of the program right now. When you think of USC now, you're going to think of Maiava, because it's Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley is known for what? Well, producing good offenses, but more importantly, producing great quarterback play. And Maiava is their quarterback, and he fits what a typical Lincoln Riley QB is, where they pass the ball well, they have a great scheme that supports them, but they also have an ability to at least escape the pocket and make something happen with their legs here and there. Jalen Hurts and Kyler Murray and Caleb Williams could do more than that. Baker Mayfield could at least escape the pocket and make something happen occasionally. Maiava can do that and a little bit more. He had over 300 rushing yards last year at UNLV when he was the starter. Miller Moss was a complete statue. There was nothing that he was going to be doing on the ground. Nothing. So Maiava's more of a dynamic quarterback, more of a dual threat quarterback. Watching him play was like Miller Moss of earlier this season, but with legs. And that's what USC needs, especially entering next season, where all the pressure is going to be on Lincoln Riley, and he'll have to win, and I think win big to keep his job next season. And last but not least is, I think, an obvious point that USC's defense is so much better than it was last year. In this game, they only allowed 310 yards, 13 offensive points, 191 passing yards for 5 yards per attempt, and 119 yards for 4.8 yards per carry. And I think that the rushing yards they allowed shows not just how USC lacks players and that holds this staff back, especially up front, but their front's gotten banged up. I mean, Bear Alexander left for the portal. They lost, I forget his name, Lucas, Is it Jalen Lucas? I think it's Jalen Lucas, maybe Anthony Lucas. They lost him earlier this season too. Devastating. He was their best defensive end. And they've taken some hits on that interior of the D-line and overall there in terms of injuries and depth. And they did a good job. This team did. This defense. The defense helped USC win. The offense did too, but holding Nebraska to 13 offensive points, let's see what the Cornhuskers have scored in other games. They scored 17 offensive points against Ohio State. They scored 20 against UCLA. They scored 14 against Rutgers, 28 against Purdue. I mean, USC held. This is how important the pick six was. If USC was going to lose this game, it was going to be because of the pick six and nothing else. Because you factor that out, a play that is rare, especially when it's going to be returned 45 yards like that. It's a rare play. USC also had a blocked field goal from CR Wright. The Trojans were really ahead in this game, somewhat in control of this game the entire time, and they looked like the better team for all 4 quarters. And that's the thing that's devastating if you're a Nebraska fan, because Wisconsin and Iowa are teams that I think are not as good as USC in terms of a potential measurement. Like, they don't have the same ceiling, and in power ratings, they're not as high. But Wisconsin's competent, and they're well coached. And Iowa on the road is going to be just as challenging, I think, as USC on the road. I mean, the Trojans held Nebraska in terms of points allowed and points scored to close to season lows outside of the Indiana game. So it was impressive. You should be proud if you're a USC fan of your team. And this defense is much improved. And I think next year, when they get to use the portal, when they get to have year 2 in their system underway, they'll be a better team. And my MVP for the game is Woody Marks, 25 total touches, 182 total yards, 7.3 yards per touch, no touchdowns, but he helped his team get in a position to score multiple touchdowns. So that's it in this video, and thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Connolly OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Taylor Nye for being All-American members. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Go Trojans, and go Big Red. See you guys soon.